Obama's dealing with it, I think, in a fairly interesting way. Fox News does not represent America, or at least the Glenn Beck and Bill O'Reilly and Hannity do not represent America. I think that a lot of that is actually hurting the Republican Party. I mean, it's revving up the base, the really conservative base, but it's hurting the, the Republican Party right now is under 35% support in America. So how do you get from 35 to 50? Well, you do it by persuading people you've got some rationality and intelligence on your side. This kind of stuff is not going to persuade anyone of that. So it's basically, it's an act of polarization. But I think that there is a significant amount of strong opposition. Our politics has become much more partisan, much more mean-spirited, much less civil. And I think that's, in some ways, a real challenge to us. I think Obama has tried to keep things at a fairly high level of communication. Obviously, I like Obama. But I think he's kept it at a fairly high level of communication, and I think that he's not playing those dirty games. On the other hand, I think that a lot is going to depend on what happens in the next 8 months on healthcare, on climate control, on the war, on jobs. If the economy starts coming back as it seems to be going, but right now the economy is coming back on the stock market, not in the jobs. But if you start to see real leadership, and in this sense, I will say that probably the most important thing that happened in the last week or 10 days was when Olympia Snowe, a Republican from the state of Maine in the U.S. Senate, voted in support of one version of the health care reform bill. That breaks a solid front, and it breaks it because she is universally respected. She is as respected politically as John McCain would be respected politically. So it's important that she did that. And I should say that I lived part of my life in Maine, so I consider her one of my senators. So I think a lot's going to depend on just where this whole dialogue goes. I think we have got, you may or may not have read this piece by Thomas Friedman, who's a columnist of the New York Times, who wrote The World is Flat, and a bunch of other really good books. Thomas Friedman wrote an article about 2.5 to 3 weeks ago in the Sunday New York Times in which he really put it out there and said that we are creating an atmosphere of hatred toward our president that essentially is inviting violence. And he just said it right out there, and do we want to be responsible for this? And I actually believe that's happening, and it's scary as hell. No, I think Obama has played this issue as carefully and appropriately as he could. He's denied that he says he does not believe race is at the heart of the opposition to his administration of the health care plan. I think the other thing, the most important thing to say here is that it's an incredibly contentious issue in the minds of many Americans. And it was an issue that was severely tested during the election. You had a number of white working-class voters, union members in Ohio, who were very much against Obama in the primary. They voted for Hillary. That was true in places like Pennsylvania as well. And one of the reasons they voted against Obama was because he was black. But they voted for Obama in the general election. They changed their approach. He helped them to change their approach. The way he dealt with the issue, the way he dealt with his speech on race was brilliant. So in many respects, the most positive version, which I actually believe, of that election is that Americans chose to go with their better instincts as opposed to the baser instincts. Does that mean that their better instincts are going to always prevail? No, because I think their baser instincts are being appealed to all over the place. And what will happen with in the long run is still up in the air. But I don't think that Obama is doing anything to invigorate that movement toward their baser selves. And I think that it's a very dicey question how much the Republican Party wants to get involved in that. Now you've got a Republican chair of the Republican National Committee who's a black former lieutenant governor in Maryland. He's been pretty reckless in the stuff he's been saying. And I'm not sure to what degree it's going to help or hurt the Republican Party.